Okay, we're now going to shift tack and we're going to put on some economics hats now. I'd like to invite up Jake Musson. Jake comes from southwest Victoria, so apparently as good a country as Gippsland. So Jake comes from a large family farm. Some of you might know his father Peter. It's an 800 cow farm out towards the South Australian border. Jake has got a Bachelor of Ag as well as a Master in Agribusiness. And previously he worked as an economic analyst for Dairy Australia in the farm team. But since relatively recent times, he now works as a business analyst for Warrakirri Asset Management. And some of you would know Warrakirri is one of the larger farm ownership groups, both dairy, grains in Australia. And Jake's going to explore for us some work that he was involved in when he was at DA around a further refinement of the true value of a heifer up to the point of calving. Jake, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. Before going too far, I will need to credit Phil Shannon and Beth Scott for the work. I moved fairly early on in the project, but I've stepped up to discuss some results. So with every new technology, we should be making our investment decisions based on that sound evidence and data, and that's even when we're looking at genomics. It's the starting point, that data, that lets us understand the investment merit, both in that risk and return profile for undertaking these investments. So I'm here to talk about that starting point, heifer rearing costs. But before the results, I'm going to go into some of the questions we're actually trying to understand here. So there's a whole range of questions that come under this umbrella. We've seen this structural shift in the industry from that, say, 50-50 heifer bull rearing to a whole mix of sex semen and dairy beef integrated into a lot of farms that we're looking at now. And we need to support farmers to optimise this transition. So the first area I'm going to look at is this replacement stock. So do I adjust or do I replace, rear these stock myself? It's a pretty simple question, but you need to understand the costs and the risk of losing money rearing these animals before answering this. Now, not many farmers can actually put a sound figure on this, surprisingly. Previous industry estimates range from, say, $1,100 to $2,500 for this rearing replacement. And if you've got a range that large in an industry statistic figure, how many farmers are actually going to be able to put their cost up there and say, I can confidently say, it's costing me $1,600 to rear this heifer? And how many are actually losing money because we don't know this answer? So, knowing this figure is important both on the replacement heifers and the saleable animals. For replacements, depending where your cost is, the time it takes to pay off rearing costs in the herd will differ significantly depending how high that is. And this is represented at that break-even point in the middle. And depending where you are, and depending how high your costs are, how profitable your farm is, that break-even cost is going to adjust up and down that scale for every individual farmer. So this means, say, a farm with a high turnover rate with low number of lactations with a high cost of rearing their heifers is at a far higher risk of having cows around that break-even point rather than the herd sitting on the right-hand side of the scale and each individual cow making a profit. So the second component of this is, what do we do with our excess calves? Should we be going down the dairy beef, the export heifers? Should we be selling these at 10 days old, weaning, or keeping them on to 2-3 years? Again, it comes back to understanding that rearing cost and the costs of rearing at various stages of their life cycle, so farmers can maximise their margin and minimise that risk. So dairy is inherently risky. So the last thing we want to do is increase our risk profile of farmers by rearing them too long or longer than they need to be. So the issue is, as an industry, we've had this step change and we've got a fairly low understanding of our costs to rear these calves. So how do we solve that issue? So first of all, there's a calculator out there called Advanced Nutrition in Action, and it's fairly detailed. But the problem is it's not very user-friendly. It's got hundreds of inputs that you can change, adjust, and it's fantastic if you want to delve in to a part of the intricacies of the farmer's heifer rearing costs, or focus on one of the components, say health or labour. But it's not user-friendly, and as we know, if something's not simple, easy to pick up and run in a discussion group, we're not going to use it. So secondly, we looked at breaking that apart and determining the big impacts, so those sort of big ticket items in the cost of rearing heifers. And this is to first lactation. We came at feed as 56%, and this is going to differ for individuals, but this is just on a general basis. Feed is over 50% of that cost of rearing a heifer. Health and breeding is around 12%, and labour is at 11%. So we've identified these major inputs, and this is based both on experience in the consultant and interviewing a group of farmers as well on what their costs were. So they're likely to be the key items farmers would need to understand and consider in their replacement rearing plans. Now, as always, we want to focus on the big ticket items. So that's where it brings us to feed. And we use the Dairy Farm Monitor project just to throw some feed costs into the equation. Because feed makes up such a significant portion of these costs, we're looking at both regionally specific costs and some of the sensitivity analysis around different farms and different systems. So for the Dairy Farm Monitor project, we looked at the cost of Graze feed for the 2019-20 season, and this shows Victorian costs averaging at around $125 per tonne dry matter for that year. So the range was around $78 to over $200. So a massive range there, and this just demonstrates the range between farmers every single year. So as you can see on the left-hand axis, Graze pasture dollars per tonne dry matter, and this is only Gippsland and southwest Victoria, keep in mind. So we're going to see some significant variation in that if you look at irrigation regions of New South Wales and northern Victoria, particularly over the last few years in drought. So you can see even in those relatively stable regions, we've got an over $150 per tonne dry matter Graze feed costs that we need to understand. So yeah, there's some significant differences between farmers there. So onto some of the results. We've broken it down into a couple of systems, and there's more detail in the report, but I've just picked out the zero grazing and the 75% grazing systems. This has been broken down into 3 stages and to help with decision making. So birth to weaning is the first stage, weaning to 200 kilos, and then 200 kilos to calving. And this aligns with the general selling points a farmer will be facing throughout that time period. So 0% grazing represents a business that might keep stock on farm and feed them supplement only. So concentrates and fodder, whilst 75% grazing represents your typical wet region, Gippsland, southwest, Tasmania. So there is a balance of concentrates and fodder in there. So it's logical that the more graze feed you get into the cow, the more the overall costs reduce, and that's simply the correlation between relative cost of direct graze feed and the comparison to other feed sources available. So some of the assumptions in this were, first of all, concentrates were based on that $350 a tonne dry matter. Fodder was at $300, and that may appear to be high, and it's assumed that fodder required for the rearing replacements needs to be of high quality in order to provide that balanced diet and encourage a reduced wastage. Now, last of all, we've got our graze feed at that average that we showed before, around that $125 a tonne dry matter. So between the two groups, you can see a $500 to $600 difference between zero grazing and 75% grazing. So immediately we can see the benefit of maximising that graze percentage of the diet in those replacement stocks. So secondly, we looked at a bit of sensitivity analysis on the cost of graze fodder for farmers. Now we've got the two groups here. We've got, again, birth to weaning, weaning to 200, 200 to calving, and we've got the graze of the lower end of the scale, which is, that $78 per tonne dry matter, relatively low cost. And then the graze feed of 213, and that represents the upper scale of the farmers that are in this dairy farm monitor data set. So you can see between the two, just by adjusting that homegrown graze feed, we've got over $300 difference between farmers to rear those replacement heifers based on their direct graze feed costs. Now, in reality, this is actually going to be further, as some farmers have highest conserve portion of the young stock's diet. They might graze in summer compared to spring, and that graze pasture will differ between the two, and that's where that personalised advice really comes into it. But if we go back to that individual business for a second, and just some of the assumptions, again, $78 lower end, 213 higher end. But when we look at the individual businesses, I've picked out two southern Australia, so this is Gippsland and southwest Victoria, just to have a look at their cost of graze pasture for the last 13 years. So again, two relatively stable regions, and it just demonstrates the volatility of feed within the business. So it's not so much taking that average cost of feed, it's looking at the volatility and the risk profile of that individual farmer. Now that the farmer knows their price points, having gone through this process, and they've got a relatively good understanding of what their heifer rearing costs are, they can actually go and make the decision whether it is in fact profitable to rear these calves through that high cost period or not, and to understand how much risk they're undertaking with these feed costs. So just as a rough example, I've put a line in there at around 100, that was supposed to be 115, pretend it's there, but $115 a tonne dry matter feed as something a farmer may put in as their margin of safety, is what they're comfortable rearing those heifers. Now, as you can see in this, that orange farm has gone above that on 4 occasions where their feed costs have actually exceeded what their comfort level is. Now, in terms of the decision, this could go several ways. They might realise that the risk is too high for their liking and only rear those necessary replacements. And that would reduce their labour and health pressures, health costs as well on an overall basis. And they could do this by selling dairy beef at 10 days old or just selling calves younger. They could also choose to adjust if this level becomes too extreme, which might be more preferable if the calves were reared on the milking area, because you've got that opportunity cost then baked in as well. Now, the farmer in blue may decide that their risk profile is actually very low and low enough to maintain or increase the number of calves reared on from stage 2 and 3. So both, to make those decisions, need to know their risk profile and their heifer costs to actually make this decision. So just to bring it together, the cost of rearing heifers is poorly understood in the industry, both from an industry level and individual farmer level. We've seen that step change in recent years, so farms need to understand that cost before any planning can occur. There's no point looking at sex semen or rearing dairy beef to 300 kilos if the biggest margin is to sell at 10 days old. Secondly, there's opportunity to focus on the big ticket items if we were to progress and build this into a separate calculator. So you're looking at the 3 big ticket items: feed, health and breeding, and labour. And there is that opportunity to utilise this in that discussion group setting. Just bring those big ticket items for a discussion. And lastly, a simple calculator would benefit the industry, but it's important to have this supported through extension. It's a simple calculator to capture those costs and see where they sit on the spectrum, so it can progress that discussion within the group. It's the first step towards an educated discussion in which we can make those decisions based on those economic truths rather than that gut feeling. So that about sums it up. Happy to take some questions. More on the actual figures if we like, or yeah, any questions at all.
Starting with your economics, Jake.
Yes.
Any questions?
I've got one. Jake, so first of all, thank you so much for all the kind of thinking that you did on this project before you finished up with us. There's a lot of interest in this work, and certainly, Pete Williams, you've said this is often the biggest kind of talking point when introducing farmers to genomic testing. Jake, I wanted to pick your brains on, so John Morton presented that question of, do you keep the high genetic merit later born heifers and try and catch them up, or do you keep the earliest born ones? Like, what's the trade-off? Just wondering whether, and I don't know whether I'm putting you on the spot and whether you'll be able to answer it, but any kind of initial gut feels, obviously it's going to depend on which kind of one of those years you're in, but any sort of thoughts on that question?
Yeah, certainly from a whole systems approach, I guess, if you're adjusting your whole milk curve, particularly, then there's going to be further flow-on effects. So if you're keeping those later genetically superior animals, but you're flattening your milk curve and you're producing more off-season milk from what you're comfortable with, or what your system's producing at the minute, then it's going to cost you in other areas. Your milking herd's going to have higher input feeds. So it's more about making sure that if you do change your whole system, which that sort of sounds like it would be, then it's about understanding that cost to change the system, because it's quite a complex one, and it's not someone with a flat system where they or a flat calve year-round calving is not going to have as much issue as opposed to someone that's seasonal calving, because you can keep those on longer, you can rear them through, and it doesn't really affect your milk curve. Whereas if someone that's always got a tight period in autumn or spring where they calve, then that's going to significantly affect your milk curve if you keep them on and they're calving later, and it spreads that out. So there's a whole range of factors from milk price to feed costs that come into that. So certainly, probably not one I can answer off the top of my head.
Terrific. One more question. Sorry, just here. Or on the screen? On the slider. Jake, can you read that question out, please?
Is there a report discussing these findings in more detail? Yes, I've read a report discussing these in more detail. Steph, you'll probably have to give those details on that.
Yeah, sorry, you're over that. Jake, if they want to send me an email, I'm happy to share the report. Yeah,
send Steph Bullen an email to go through that, and she'll send out the report.
Okay. Everyone, if you would please thank Jake. Thanks very much, Jake.